Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
This week on Heroic Media, the United Nations warns that India is facing a crisis in the sharply declining number of girls.
A new study shows that when it comes to marriage, many millennials are saying, I don't.
And a midwife in Sweden faces discrimination for her pro-life beliefs.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we explore news headlines that deal with a lot of very foundational moral issues that really affect society, very core to our life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the stories we'll cover will deal with family and marriage and life.
Absolutely, and so those issues tend to revolve around abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly.
So Patrick, what's our first story for the day?
All right, so our first story, the United Nations warns that the shrinking number of Indian girls caused by the illegal abortion of millions of babies has now reached emergency proportions. This has also caused a rise in crimes such as kidnapping and sex trafficking. So pretty wild. I mean, I didn't realize that this was such a big problem in India as well. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we know in China, we've covered stories before where this is such a big problem. So what do you think it is about India that's like China that is causing these?
Well, I imagine there are a lot of factors, but one big factor is the caste system. Yeah. And so it was actually, saying that if you don't have any sons, if you only have daughters, you can actually drop in the caste system because the inheritance ends up going to your nephews or to cousins, and the girls just aren't treated very well there.
Right.
Girls are viewed as a liability because you have to have this dowry, they're expensive. Males are seen as an asset. They're going to carry on the family name. They're going to provide and support. So it's really a very inherently anti-woman perspective, and that just plays out in these abortions, which are all abortion is anti-woman.
Right.
But here you're specifically aborting baby girls because they're girls.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, and I'm glad you mentioned that difference between how society there views boys and girls, right? Because they look at them as a liability, like you said. I think you put it well. And they go, well, these girls are going to cost me a lot of money, right? Because there they have like dowry and things like that. So they go, man, we're going to have to spend a lot of money. And so I think that these kind of social norms there have a huge impact on that. And then just I think also the way that society has, secular society, at least as a whole, has been trending, and laws have changed, and abortion is legal, and I think that all these things kind of start to erode and kind of shift that way. Now, you mentioned one thing. You said that abortion is always anti-women. Why do you say that? Because some people don't think that. Right,
absolutely, and it's seen sort of as empowering women, but we just look at the effects of women. We're taking a woman who is creating life, who's bringing new life into the world, and we're going against that. We're having her destroy the life that's within her. And so, I mean, if we look at the statistics, you see all the psychological damage, sometimes the physical damage, the emotional, the spiritual damage.
Sure.
Abortion really harms women on every level, not to mention what it does to the baby, which is, of course, to kill the unborn baby.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that gets overlooked, too, that I read an article on recently, is that it's so anti-women. You take away the one unique thing that's women, right?
Thing that makes women so special.
Yeah, exactly. That makes women so special, and kind of the pinnacle of God's creation, right? That's the last thing created in the Bible, right? Is woman. So I think that it's just like you said, it's so inherently anti-women on all categories. Now, specifically with these abortions and targeting baby girls, technology is awesome, but it kind of stinks when it's used for like sonograms and things like that, or ultrasounds, where you can determine the sex of your child and then make a decision based on that to have an abortion. Now, it's illegal there, but apparently it still, of course, happens all the time. And so that also leads to this decline in this imbalance of boys to girls being born.
Right, absolutely. And the numbers are they're staggering here. There was a May 2011 study in The Lancet that found that up to 12 million Indian girls have been aborted in the last 30 years. 12 million.
Wow.
And so this has skewed the sex-child ratio. There's about 918 girls for every 1,000 boys in 2011, which means there's almost 1 in 10 extra boys or missing girls, depending on how you look at it. But as they grow up, what this is going to mean is that there's going to be difficulty in finding wives. And of course, this leads to human trafficking, to sex slavery, because that gender balance, and that might not sound like that much, but you have to keep in mind that the population of India is 1.2 billion.
Right.
So when you take that and you multiply it out, that's a lot of people missing, and that's a really skewed ratio.
Yeah, that's true. It does end up being a lot of people. And I think that we have to remember that too. About the numbers, and sometimes people will say, well, 13 million, that's such a small percentage compared to, in reference to the number of abortions, that's such a small number in reference to the population of that area. But I think we have to remember that 13 million is a lot of people dead, right? If you just said, oh, it was only, I can't remember the exact number, things like 6 million Jewish people that were killed in the Holocaust, if it was only 6 million, like people would be like, what? And so when we talk about this, I think we have to be real careful too, because sometimes people will get the attitude like, oh, it's such a small percentage. They focus on a percentage, but really, it's not the percentage. It's the number of people, like the sheer number of people, regardless of how relative it is to that population. It's a problem when you're killing that many people.
Problem. And it's interesting that the United Nations is now recognizing this as a problem, because the United Nations is not particularly known for being pro-life, but here we have Lakshmi Puri, who is the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, and she this is a quote from her: "The sharply declining child sex ratio in India has reached emergency proportions, and urgent action must be taken to alleviate this crisis." And so she's just recognizing that it has gotten so skewed. There's going to be such a difference in the number of men to the number of women growing up in the next generation. This is going to have a huge economic impact. India is one of the, I believe, the 5 biggest growing economies, and whether it succeeds is really largely going to be dependent on whether they continue to kill all of their baby girls.
Right, absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that too, because we think about the UN and we're like, well, they're not inherently like pro-life necessarily, but when these things, all these abortions and this really affects the economy, right? And so I think that's one thing that gets overlooked quite a bit from the pro-life perspective, because that's kind of like more of like a secular kind of talking point, right? But yeah, it does affect other things that anybody can feel, right? Or care about or be affected by.
Right, absolutely.
And it's very visible to see that. So that's, I think, one of the big reasons why the UN has brought this up, and they're like doing these studies and being like, hey, let's look at this unbalanced sex ratio. And it affects lots of different areas, and of course it leads to trafficking when you degrade women like that, and when the economy starts going bad, people start getting desperate and doing things like sex trafficking to get money.
Yep.
So
it's all related.
It is. It all deteriorates.
Absolutely.
All right. In our next story, today's young adults are on track to have the lowest rate of marriage by age 40 compared to any previous generation. Now, this has also caused some potential for serious economic repercussions. So yet another scenario, right, where kind of societal type of interactions are causing a potential serious economic problems as well.
Absolutely.
So this is with marriage, though. So millennials today, which is kind of like the youngest, I don't know, every time you look for like a millennial boundary, like a definition, it's always kind of floats, it seems like, right? Same thing with like Generation X and all this. But basically the trend is that with each of these generations, people are either not getting married or waiting to get married much later. And so this generation, Generation X, is on track to have the lowest of any generation
ever,
before.
And it's very interesting because you have to say, what is this going to do economically? What is this? Just the certain amount of stability, and there's just certain things that happen when you get married, and you look at your life differently. And it's just statistically, unmarried people are less likely to buy homes, start families, be saving up money, and so this is going to impact the country in a very real way.
Right.
And it's interesting if you look at some of the speculation behind the reasons behind it. It looks like there's a lot of different ideas.
There's a lot of different ideas. The importance, I think, one of the biggest things is the importance of marriage is diminishing, and I think that goes all the way back to the creation of the pill and everything, and societal views around sex and marriage in general. and sex in general. And then I think that obviously translates into marital relationships. Like once you say, it doesn't matter if you have sex outside of marriage, it doesn't matter if you live with that person outside of marriage. Basically, you get all the benefits of marriage for the most part, except you don't have this. It's almost like the subconscious commitment.
Right.
You know what I
right.
mean? It like gets rid of the commitment or any like you don't have anything no stake in the game.
Right.
Almost. You know
right.
what I mean?
That's a big problem because
Yeah.
if you are raising a family, if you are raising kids, if you're buying a house together, you're going through all these steps, and that's what this article is saying is that people are doing those things. They're moving in together, but not getting married. They are having kids. They are buying a place together. So they're taking all these steps, but they're at no time are they standing up in front of themselves and in front of their loved ones and in front of God and saying, I'm going to commit to you for the rest of my life through good times and bad. So they're basically saying, yeah, this is great, let's do all these things, but when times get tough, I'm out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
There's never any clear commitment. Maybe I'll stay, maybe I won't.
Right.
And then what happens when you come up to that and you have kids and things aren't working out now. So the lack of commitment I think is huge, and just sort of a fear of commitment among the younger generation is a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's just so many facets to why that is. But I think that the decline of the view of religion, I think, has a lot to do with that as well, because marriage, no matter what current laws that are trying to be made about homosexual marriage itself is rooted, I think, a lot in religion, and is a very religious thing, right? It's a sacrament, Jesus, it's a sacrament that Jesus himself instituted, right? So I think that with the decline of religious views and people claiming that they're religious, there seems to be this big movement nowadays where it's okay to be spiritual but not religious, right? You be a Christian, but you don't adhere to any specific religious beliefs. And so I think there's so many different areas, but I think that that's one of the things that has a big impact on people getting married or caring about marriage at all.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting that it's not just the idea that people aren't getting married. It's the idea that they don't even care, that marriage as a whole is declining. And I think this ties into the other things that we discuss on this show, because it is all related. It's not, when we talk about some of these same-sex marriage cases, same-sex marriage didn't pop up out of nowhere as a notion, all of a sudden. It's this idea of marriage that has been deteriorating, where we have contraception and all of a sudden marriage isn't about fertility. And then we have very easy divorce and all of a sudden marriage isn't about permanence. And we have cohabitation. We just have all of these things. We have prenups. All these things. There's no permanence. There's no permanence. And so as we just sort of dig away at every feature of marriage, and then we have things like same-sex marriage, this is a natural progression, and this is just an indication that our culture of marriage has been weakening, and we need to build it up. It needs to be strengthened.
Very well put. That's exactly how I feel. There's so many different things. I'm really glad you mentioned prenups too, because I never understood that. But it's a sign of the way that people view marriage, right? It's this thing that's this contract, but even when they say the vows, I'm wondering what is going on in their head. Are they just don't care about what they're actually saying?
I will commit to you for the rest of my life,
right?
But just in case, let's work out some details.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't get that. It's like, if you're going to marry that person, if you even need to think about a prenup, then you shouldn't be marrying them, because it's probably not going to work out. So, and I think just also we have to remember, just on the topic of marriage, that not everybody is called to marriage, right? Everybody has a different vocation. Some people are meant to be single and not get married. Some people have a religious vocation. Some people, people's vocation is to be married. And so I think we have to remember that. And if we do think that our vocation is marriage, that we need to ask God. We need to ask God to send the right person for us, and maybe not necessarily the person that we're looking for. Because it seems like a lot of times people get very materialistic, or, oh my gosh, I need this woman that looks just like this, that has this shoe size, that has a freckle right here. And it's like, no, let's get rid of these kind of superficial type of things and really ask God what God has in store for our life and for our vacation. So.
That's a good point. We really have to see it as vocation and how we focus on it.
Yeah.
Coming up after the break, we will discuss a Swedish midwife who has lost numerous job offers due to her pro-life views.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
In our next story, a nurse in Sweden is making headlines after she recently had several job offers rescinded when the potential employers found out about her pro-life beliefs.
Wow,
So
pretty crazy.
It's crazy. It's a shocking story. So this is a nurse, Eleanor Grimmark, and I actually had the opportunity earlier today to speak with Michael Norton, who is senior counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom in Denver. And Michael Norton is a former U.S. attorney for the state of Colorado under both President Reagan and President George H.W. Bush. So let's take a look at what he had to say. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today.
Michelle, it is an honor to be with you and a pleasure. Thank you.
So we're talking today about this Swedish nurse, and she gets a degree as a midwife, and she completes an internship, and she actually receives a job offer, but then that job offer is rescinded when her employer finds out about her pro-life views. What's your reaction to that?
This is a tragedy, Michelle, and this is not the only case like this around the world and in Europe that we're working on. But Eleanor Grimmark is a very important case in point. She is a trained and experienced and qualified midwife. Midwifery is an honorable position, profession that dates back really to the book of Exodus. You might remember the two most famous midwives of all are the ones that rescued Moses and allowed him to live and to become as famous in the Bible as he is. There are two named midwives in the Bible, only two, and that is Shiphrah and Puah. And Eleanor Grimmark is no different. She was trained to help create life, not to destroy it. And yet she is being deprived of her livelihood in Sweden, and actually was forced to move to Norway to practice her profession because of her sincere religious objections and beliefs against abortion. She was being required in this particular job you talked about to perform abortions as a condition of holding the job. She left that job and got another one and was terminated from it for the same reason, and finally had a third job opportunity from which she was also terminated for her faith beliefs against abortion. It's a tragedy, and it's against international law. There are several laws in Europe, international and human rights commission laws, that stand for the proposition that a person may not be forced against their faith beliefs to perform an abortion, and yet those laws are being violated and simply ignored in Sweden and elsewhere.
To me, that's just shocking. And you say that that's not the only case, so there's more going on.
There is more. In Poland, an extraordinarily experienced OBGYN, Dr. Shazan, has been terminated from Holy Family Hospital in Warsaw, Poland, because of his sincere Roman Catholic beliefs and faith that abortion is the taking of a human life. He refused to perform an abortion on a woman who it was believed was carrying an unborn child who had some deformities, and yet he was terminated for that. The mayor of Warsaw, Poland, came out in opposition to him. I think that ought to be of extraordinary importance throughout Europe and throughout the world. There's a third case involving two nurses in Scotland who are likewise being disciplined because they refuse, as a matter of faith principles, to engage in and perform abortions. That's happened here in the United States, and we've won those cases. There are cases in New Jersey and the state of Washington and around the United States where we are winning those cases so that people, as a matter of faith, do not have to participate in abortion. And we are sure hopeful that those same victorious results prevail for Ms. Grimmark and for the doctor in Poland and for the nurses in Scotland as well.
Absolutely. And you said that international law and some countries in Europe, the law there does recognize conscience rights. Is that correct?
Oh, very definitely. The laws, the international laws, Human Rights Commission, the laws of Europe, the laws of the European market, and all those nations specifically provide for religious conscience exemptions to such things as being required to perform abortions contrary to one's faith as a condition of employment. And someone ought not to be terminated because they are sincerely religiously motivated to believe that abortion is the taking of an unborn human being.
Absolutely. And it seems that what that point of view is saying is that Christians or pro-lifers need not apply, that we can't have pro-life people in medicine. But it seems like this stance is not just about abortion, but there's a mentality behind a pro-life doctor, behind a pro-life mindset, and that's a contribution to the medical field. So it seems that this kind of regulation would almost cut out that entire demographic.
You're right about that. And what's curious in Sweden is there's a shortage of midwives. They need midwives to be able to function in Sweden. And I cannot imagine a more appropriate person to be a midwife than someone that honors and cherishes life from the moment of conception to natural death, as does Ms. Grimark. And it's just a tragedy that there is this wave sweeping the world of anti-religious fervor, religious discrimination, and pro-abortion activities. We're going to change it with God's grace, and I think in Ms. Grimark's case, the truth will ultimately prevail in the end.
Yes, absolutely. I hope so. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for taking the time to be here with me. Thank you for your comments and all of your insight.
Thank you, Michelle. It's an honor to be with you, and we appreciate you.
Thanks.
That was great. That was some good stuff there. I'm glad you had that conversation with him. One of the things that stood out to me in what he said was that he mentioned that he was like, it just seems like laws are being ignored. And that's how I feel too. I'm like, why is it? It seems like, especially here in America, like with the homosexual marriages here in Colorado even, they're ignoring laws that are in place, right? And they're just saying, we're going to do whatever we want anyway because this is what we feel is right. And so one point of like part of me tries to like flip this around. I'm like, okay, well, what if I was, there was some law that was I felt was persecuting me. What would I do? I wouldn't abide by it either.
Right.
But I can see that. But I think that what we have to remember is the idea of a just law, right? And I think that the current law that we have in place that people are circumventing now is a just law. And I think we have to remember that. But it's just so strange that it seems to be more and more prevalent that laws are getting ignored, regardless of what's in place. It's like, why are we ignoring the whole judicial voting democratic system that we have in place?
It seems like that's happening with a lot of some of the life issues, a lot of the marriage issues, various religious freedom issues. And I'm really grateful that we have groups like Alliance Defending Freedom, which Michael Norton works for, who really are able to stand up for people in courts and say, okay, we're gonna do this. And they cover so many cases. It's really shocking to see throughout Europe, throughout the US, there's just a ton of these cases that are coming up. And so it's a problem. It's a growing problem. As he mentioned, there are a number of cases in which this specific, the nurses and the doctors being discriminated against for their pro-life views. This is happening a lot, so we need to definitely stay on our toes and be aware of it.
Absolutely. Conscience rights are I think, at the core of what we as human beings need to have, right? You have to adhere to your conscience. So I just think that, this is bad, but hopefully things will begin to change.
Absolutely. We'll have one more story after the break.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. In our final story, the Archdiocese of Philadelphia has announced that St. John Paul II and St. Gianna Beretta Molla will be the patron saints of the World Meeting of Families taking place next year.
Cool. I think it's going to be really exciting having it here in the United States. There's supposed to be tens of thousands of people going, and I think it'll be really good. And I think that the choice of patron saints is really good. And Archbishop Chaput had the following to say about that. He said, St. John Paul II and St. Gianna have been chosen as the two worthy patron saints to guide all in preparation and participation of this international event as they fully embody the history, mission, and theme of the World Meeting of Families 2015. So I think he's right.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the World Meeting of Families, just to give our viewers a little bit of information if they're not familiar with it.
Yes.
It's held in different locations. It changes throughout the world. But it's just a gathering that's intended to really try to strengthen and encourage families.
Yes.
And so they're expecting a huge turnout. It's going to be in Philadelphia in September of 2015.
Right.
It's hoped that the Pope will attend and the Pope will come. There's some expectation of that.
Right.
The Vatican hasn't quite officially confirmed it yet. And the theme for this one is going to be "Love is our mission, the family fully alive." So, and I think that really these two saints really just embody that. You have John Paul II, who was so committed to families and married life. He has ordained more married saints than all the other popes before him combined.
Wow.
And lay saints. So he's very committed to the laity and to marriage and to the vocation of family life.
And he was also the first pope to visit Philadelphia too, which is kind of interesting.
That's a fun fact. And then Saint Gianna is very interesting. I don't know if as many people know about her, but she was an Italian woman. She was a mother and a pediatrician, and she at one point was pregnant, and there was some complications. And she was told that she had 3 choices. She could get an abortion, which would save her life, but would kill the child.
Right.
She could have a complete hysterectomy, which would end the life of the baby, and she would not be able to get pregnant again.
Yep.
But that would also save her life. Or she could remove just the problematic tumor, which would have potential for future